What the Amish women can't do before marriage. What if the rules you had to follow before marriage were completely different from anything you grew up assuming was normal? Not slightly different, not a matter of degree, a genuinely different framework, one that shapes how you dress, who you spend time with, how you communicate, what skills you develop, and what your community expects of you before you are considered ready to build a household of your own. Before we get started, this video is for educational purposes and is based on general information about Amish culture. Practices may not apply to all Amish communities. Most people who learn about the expectations placed on young Amish women before marriage have the same initial reaction. It looks restrictive. It looks like a world of things that are not permitted and a long list of freedoms that have not yet been granted. But here is what almost everyone who has looked more carefully discovers. The expectations placed on young Amish women before marriage are not primarily about prohibition. They are primarily about preparation. The question the Amish community is answering is not what can we prevent these young women from doing. The question is, what do they need to know and who do they need to become before they are genuinely ready to build a life that is worth building? Today, I am going to walk you through 5 categories of expectations that shape the lives of unmarried Amish women in many traditional communities. Respectfully, accurately, and with the understanding that these practices vary between communities and that the people living inside them have generally chosen to do so as adults. Step into an Amish farmhouse on a weekday morning, and the first thing you feel is the purposeful quality of the activity happening inside it. A young woman at the kitchen table is learning to preserve the season's vegetables, not as a school project, not as a hobby, but as a skill that the household she will eventually manage will depend on. An older sister works beside her. A mother moves between the kitchen and the back garden where the next harvest is waiting. 3 generations of women in the same domestic space, each one at a different stage of the same trajectory, learning, practicing, mastering, and eventually teaching. The visual of an Amish household in the middle of a working day is the visual of preparation in progress. Every task a young woman is learning, canning, bread baking, sewing, garden management, childcare, is a task she will need to do competently when she runs her own household. The period before marriage is understood as the period when this preparation happens. In many traditional Amish communities, the expectations placed on unmarried women are not punishments or restrictions. They are the structure within which a young woman builds the competence and the character that the community considers essential before marriage is appropriate. The philosophy is direct. Marriage and family are serious undertakings. Preparation for serious undertakings should be serious. The community that takes this view does not rush its young women toward marriage. It prepares them for it. What if the period before marriage was understood primarily as a preparation period rather than a waiting period? And what if the rules during that time existed to ensure the preparation actually happened? Here is the first category. 1. Courtship and relationship expectations. Structured courtship, the Amish approach to romantic relationships before marriage. In many traditional Amish communities, romantic relationships before marriage follow specific community-guided patterns that differ significantly from modern dating culture. Young people typically begin the courtship process during or after Rumspringa, the period of increased freedom that Amish youth experience before making the decision to join the church. Courtship in traditional Amish communities is not typically supervised in the sense of having a chaperone present for every interaction, but it is community visible in a way that modern relationships are not. Relationships develop within the context of community gatherings, Sunday singings, community work events, family visits, rather than in the private context of individual dates that the broader community is unaware of. In some more conservative communities, a traditional practice called bundling, in which a courting couple spends time together in the home with other family members present, continues. The specific practices vary significantly between Amish settlements and church districts. So the visual of a Sunday singing, the social gathering where many Amish young people first interact in a courtship context, is a room full of young people gathered in the evening, singing together, the interaction structured and community observed rather than private and individual. Then, why these expectations exist. The community-visible quality of Amish courtship reflects the Amish understanding that marriage is not only a private matter between two individuals, but a community event with community implications. The community has an interest in the marriages that form within it because those marriages determine the households that will raise the next generation. Community visibility in courtship is not surveillance. It is the natural result of a community in which significant life events happen within the community rather than outside of it. Young women in these communities develop their understanding of what they want in a partner within a community context where character is visible over time rather than presented in the managed way of modern dating. A young man's behavior in community life, his work ethic, his treatment of family members, his participation in community obligations, is observable to the young woman considering him long before a formal courtship begins. Consider how much of your understanding of a partner, in any relationship, comes from observing them in community context versus in the managed context of formal dating. The difference is significant, and the Amish community-visible courtship model reflects a genuine insight about how character is most accurately assessed. What if the next category, about dress and modesty, revealed something more practical than it might first appear? Here it is. 2. Dress and modesty before marriage. Plain dress and modest appearance. The visual markers of community membership and personal preparation. Unmarried Amish women in traditional communities wear the same plain, modest dress as married women. Long dresses in muted solid colors covering the arms and legs, made without decorative elements. The head covering worn by unmarried women in many communities differs slightly from that worn by married women, a distinction that is visible within the community and signals marital status without announcement. The prohibition on jewelry, makeup, and personal adornment applies equally to unmarried and married women in traditional communities. The principle is the same at every stage of a woman's life. Appearance should reflect community membership and personal humility rather than individual personality expression or attractiveness signaling. Some communities observe specific dress expectations during the courtship period that distinguish women who are in a courtship relationship from those who are not, practices that vary considerably between settlements and church districts. The smell of a handmade Amish dress, fresh cotton fabric, simple and clean, is the smell of something made rather than purchased, produced by the hands of the woman who wears it or the hands of someone who cares about her. The plain dress before marriage serves the same purpose it serves throughout an Amish woman's life. It removes appearance as a source of social competition and replaces it with community belonging as the visible identity marker. Unmarried women are not expected to make themselves attractive in the modern sense of the word in order to secure a partner. Character, competence, and community standing are the qualities that matter in courtship, not appearance. The plain dress signals this priority rather than the alternative one. Unmarried Amish women develop their self-concept in relation to their competence and their community membership rather than in relation to their appearance. So this is a genuinely different developmental context from the one most modern young women navigate, one that removes the appearance-based anxiety that characterizes much of modern young women's experience during the pre-marriage years. Notice how much of modern culture's preparation of young women for marriage and relationships focuses on appearance rather than competence. The Amish emphasis inverts this. It is possible to learn something from that inversion regardless of whether you adopt the specific practices that produce it. The next category, about technology, reveals something that applies far beyond Amish communities. Here it is. 3. Technology and information restrictions. Limited technology access, protecting the developmental environment of young women during the pre-marriage period. In traditional Amish communities, unmarried women, like all community members, do not have access to internet-connected personal devices, social media, television, or the broad media environment of modern culture. During Rumspringa, some young people interact with these technologies as part of the freedom that period offers. But within the traditional community framework before and after Rumspringa, the media environment is significantly more restricted than in modern households. Young women in these communities develop their understanding of relationships, of beauty, of what marriage looks like, and of what adult life requires primarily from the direct observation of the adults in their community, rather than from the curated representations of these things that media environments provide. They see real marriages, with their real challenges and real satisfactions, rather than performed versions of relationships. The quiet of an Amish home in the evening, no television, no phone screens, no background digital noise, is the quiet of a developmental environment where attention is available for the real things happening in the room rather than being captured by the managed things happening on a screen. The Amish community's concern about technology is not primarily about the technology itself. It is about what the technology carries, the cultural values, the representations of relationships and beauty and success, the social comparisons and external authorities that media environments introduce into the developing minds of young people. Restricting access to these environments is understood as protecting the integrity of the community's own value transmission during the years when values are most actively being formed. Unmarried women in traditional Amish communities develop their relational and life expectations primarily from direct observation of real community life. The result is expectations that are calibrated to what real household life actually requires, rather than to the idealized or dramatized versions of it that media environments present. This is a practical advantage in the actual preparation for marriage. Consider the ratio between the real relationships and households you directly observe and the represented relationships and households you consume through media. For most modern people, this ratio is heavily weighted toward the represented. The Amish invert it toward the real. Both the represented and the real contain information. The question is which one better prepares a person for actual life. What if the next category, about social behavior, revealed the community intelligence behind expectations that look like simple rule following? Here it is. 4. Social behavior and community reputation. Community visible behavior standards. The social expectations that shape character during the pre-marriage years. Unmarried Amish women in traditional communities are expected to conduct themselves in ways that reflect well on their families and on the community. This includes behavior at community gatherings, the quality of their work contributions to community events, the respect they show to elders, and the character visible in their daily interactions with neighbors and community members. Reputation, not in the modern social media sense but in the direct community knowledge sense, matters significantly in Amish courtship. A young woman whose behavior in community life reflects competence, kindness, and reliability is understood as a better candidate for marriage than one whose behavior suggests otherwise. The community observes this behavior naturally because the community is the environment in which everything significant in an Amish person's life happens. A community work gathering, a quilting bee, a canning session, a barn raising, is both a productive event and a character assessment event. The way a young woman works alongside others, the way she treats people who are struggling with a task, and the way she handles disagreement or difficulty, all of this is visible and noted by the community that will eventually witness her marriage. The Amish community's emphasis on community visible behavior during the pre-marriage years reflects the practical insight that character is most reliably assessed through direct observation over time, rather than through self-presentation in managed contexts. Modern dating culture creates primarily managed contexts: first dates, profile presentations, curated social media presence, in which people present the version of themselves they want to be seen. The Amish community visibility approach makes this management more difficult and character observation more reliable as a result. Young women who know their behavior is community visible develop the habit of behaving consistently rather than performing for specific audiences. This consistency, being the same person in community work as in family life as in courtship, is one of the character qualities the community is actually trying to assess during the pre-marriage years. Notice how your behavior changes between contexts where you believe you are being observed and contexts where you believe you are not. The Amish community visibility approach reduces the gap between these contexts by making community observation essentially constant. This is worth thinking about regardless of whether you live in a community that practices it. The final category, household preparation, is the most practically concrete of all 5. Here it is. And 5. Household and family preparation pre-marriage skill building, the systematic preparation of unmarried women for the household they will eventually manage. The period before marriage in traditional Amish communities is understood as the primary period for a young woman to develop the comprehensive household skills that running an Amish home requires. These skills are not taught in a classroom, they are learned by doing, alongside mothers, grandmothers, sisters, and community women who are already practicing them at a high level. The skill set required includes food preservation, canning, fermenting, drying, and cellaring sufficient quantities of food to supply the household through winter. It includes bread baking, from sourdough maintenance to the production of the volumes required for a large family. It includes garden management, planning, planting, maintaining, and harvesting a kitchen garden that produces a significant portion of the household's vegetable supply. It includes textile skills, sewing garments, mending, and the production of the household linens and clothing that the family will use. It includes the full range of childcare competencies required to raise children without extensive outside support. The smell of an Amish kitchen where a young woman is learning to make bread alongside her mother is the smell of flour and warm yeast and the particular warmth of a wood stove, the smell of a skill being built in real time through direct transmission from one generation to the next. The Amish household is a genuinely productive enterprise that requires a wide range of competencies to function well. A young woman who enters marriage without these competencies will manage her household less effectively than one who enters it with them fully developed. The community's expectation that pre-marriage years be used for this skill development is a practical investment in the households that will form the next generation of the community. Young Amish women who have spent several years practicing household skills before marriage enter their households with competence rather than confusion. They know how to preserve food because they have preserved food hundreds of times. They know how to manage a kitchen garden because they have managed one for years. They know how to care for young children because they have participated in the care of younger siblings and community children throughout their adolescence. The practical result is a household that functions well from the beginning, rather than one that takes years to develop basic competency. Identify one practical household skill that you do not currently have, but that your household's self-sufficiency would benefit from. Not a general category, one specific skill. Bread baking from scratch, food canning using a pressure canner, garden planning for a full growing season. Identify it and find one resource, a book, a person, a course, that begins the learning this week. The Amish build this skill base systematically over years. You can begin building yours one skill at a time, starting now. I want to tell you about the assumption I had to unlearn before I could understand any of this correctly. I grew up in a household and a culture where the years before marriage were understood primarily as years of freedom and exploration. The expectation was that young people would figure out who they were, what they wanted, and what kind of life they were building through open-ended experience, trying things, moving between contexts, accumulating diverse exposure before eventually settling into the commitments of adult life. When I first encountered the Amish pre-marriage framework, I evaluated it through that lens. And evaluated through that lens, it looked like a restriction of freedom, a narrowing of the exploration period that I had been taught was essential. The shift in my understanding came gradually through conversations with women who had grown up inside the Amish framework and chosen to stay in it. What I kept hearing was not what I expected to hear. I expected to hear about the constraints. I kept hearing about the preparation. One woman told me that when she married, she knew how to run a household. She knew how to grow food. She knew how to preserve it. She knew how to sew the family's clothing. She had been practicing all of these things for years before her wedding day. She said, when you spend those years actually learning to do the things your life will require, you don't spend the first years of your marriage learning how to live. You just live. I had been thinking about the pre-marriage years as years of becoming. She was describing them as years of becoming competent, which is a different kind of becoming and a more practically useful one. I still hold different values around individual exploration and freedom than the Amish framework does, but I understand the preparation model now in a way that I did not before, and I think there is something worth learning from it, regardless of whether you adopt it. 3 common misunderstandings that most outside observers bring to this topic. 1. viewing all community expectations as equivalent to prohibition. The expectation that unmarried women will spend their pre-marriage years developing household skills is not the same as prohibiting them from doing anything else. It is an emphasis, a community-wide agreement about what the pre-marriage years are for. Most Amish young women experience this emphasis not as a prohibition but as a purpose. The distinction between these two framings is significant, and the outside observer who defaults to the prohibition framing is missing most of what is actually happening. 2. Assuming Amish practices are uniform across all communities. Amish communities vary significantly in their specific practices across church districts, settlements, and regions. What is standard in a conservative Old Order community may differ substantially from what is practiced in a more progressive New Order community. Any description of Amish practices, including this one, describes common patterns in some communities rather than universal rules that apply everywhere. Treating any account of Amish life as the complete and universal truth about all Amish communities is an error that most serious students of Amish life quickly learn to avoid. R3. Evaluating the pre-marriage period only in terms of what is not permitted rather than what is being built. The Amish pre-marriage framework is primarily a construction project. The question the community is answering is not what should be prevented, but what should be built. A young woman who completes this preparation period has built a genuine set of competencies in food production, food preservation, household management, and community participation that the household she will eventually manage will depend on. Evaluating this period only through the lens of restriction misses the entire positive content of what the preparation is producing. Here is what connects all 5 categories and why they form a coherent system rather than a list of unrelated rules. In every expectation placed on unmarried Amish women in traditional communities is oriented toward the same goal, the building of a person who is genuinely ready, practically, socially, and characterologically, to build a household and raise children within the community's way of life. The courtship structure ensures that partnership decisions are made within a community context where character is observable over time. The plain dress removes appearance as the primary currency of marriageability. The technology restrictions protect the developing person's values from external interference. The behavior expectations build the character that community life and marriage require. And the household skill development ensures that the practical work of running a family is something the young woman enters into with competence rather than confusion. Each element serves the central goal, and the central goal, a person ready to build a genuinely functional household within a genuinely functional community, is one that most modern frameworks for the pre-marriage years do not articulate as clearly or pursue as systematically. The Amish closed loop applies here as well. The community prepares the young woman. The prepared young woman builds a household. The functional household raises children. The children become the next generation who the community prepares. Nothing is wasted. The preparation is continuous. Self-sufficiency is not only about food and farming. It is about having the skills and the character to build a life that does not depend on external systems for its basic functioning. The Amish prepare their young women specifically for that kind of life. 5 categories of expectation that together describe the Amish approach to the pre-marriage years. Structured courtship that makes character visible over time. Plain dress that removes appearance as the primary marriageability currency. Technology restrictions that protect the development of genuine values rather than mediated ones. Community visible behavior standards that build consistent character rather than managed presentation, and systematic household skill development that ensures practical competence rather than practical confusion at the start of married life. The insight worth carrying from this video is not that these specific practices are right for everyone. It is that the question the Amish community is asking, what does a person actually need to know and become before they are ready for marriage, is a serious question that deserves a serious answer. The Amish take it seriously. The preparation period they have built around it reflects that seriousness. If this video helped you understand a community you may have misread, share it with someone who has questions about how Amish life actually works, rather than how it appears from the outside. The real picture is always more interesting than the assumed one. Before you go, I want to ask you one honest question. What is the one skill or area of practical competence that you wish you had developed before you took on the household or family responsibilities you currently carry? The thing that would have made the early years of your adult life significantly easier if you had learned it before rather than during? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone, and your answer matters to how I think about what to cover next. And next week, I'm going to take you inside what Amish marriages actually look like, the traditions, the ceremony, the household structure, and what the community expects from both partners after the wedding. It is one of the most misunderstood aspects of Amish life, and what you find when you look carefully is genuinely surprising. That is next week. Be there.